Today, I'm diving deep into the world of haunted dolls, and I'm challenging myself to spend an entire night with one of them to see if these spooky stories are really true. Haunted dolls have long been a staple of folklore and popular media, captivating our imagination with their eerie presence and unexplained phenomena. From creepy antique shops to modern-day horror movies, these dolls seem to hold a special place in our collective psyche, begging the question, are they really haunted, or is it just our imagination running wild? Some people claim that haunted dolls are nothing more than a product of mass hysteria, fueled by our love of a good scare. They argue that the human brain is wired to seek patterns and meaning, even when there's none to be found. And yet, there are countless accounts from people who swear they've experienced paranormal activity with dolls, from unexplained movements to disembodied voices. From mysterious photographs to first-hand testimonials, the evidence is mounting, and it's hard to dismiss the sheer volume of reports. Take, for instance, the story of a woman who claimed her antique doll would change positions on its own, or the family who reported finding their doll's eyes glowing in the dark. These stories are certainly chilling, but are they rooted in reality, or are they simply the product of our own fevered imagination? Despite the skepticism, the tales of haunted dolls persist, and it's hard not to wonder if there's some truth to these claims. Perhaps the most famous of these dolls is Annabelle, a Raggedy Ann doll said to be possessed by the spirit of a young girl. According to legend, Annabelle was responsible for a series of terrifying events, from unexplained noises to physical attacks on those who dared to cross her path. Another infamous example is Robert, a doll said to be cursed by a former owner. Stories of Robert's haunted antics have been documented for decades, including claims of strange noises, movements, and even apparent possession. These dolls have become the stuff of urban legend, captivating our imagination with their dark history and unexplained powers. But there's one story that stands out above the rest, a tale that will leave you questioning the very fabric of reality. It's the story of a family who claimed to have been terrorized by a haunted doll, one that seemed to take on a life of its own. The family reported finding the doll in strange positions, hearing strange noises, and even experiencing physical attacks. What's most chilling, however, is the doll's apparent ability to predict the future, leaving the family with a sense of dread that's hard to shake. As I delve deeper into the world of haunted dolls, I'm struck by the sheer volume of evidence, the countless reports of paranormal activity that defy explanation. And yet, despite the skepticism, I can't help but wonder if there's some truth to these claims. Are haunted dolls mere figments of our imagination, or are they gateways to a world beyond our own? In conclusion, the world of haunted dolls is a complex one, full of contradictions and unexplained phenomena. As we navigate the fine line between belief and skepticism, we're forced to confront the unknown, to question the very fabric of reality itself. If you've had any experiences with haunted dolls or have any thoughts on the paranormal, let me know in the comments below. And if you're new here, consider subscribing for more videos on the supernatural and unknown. Part 1. The Doll in the Attic. When I first came across her, the doll was stuffed away in a box in the attic of the old house I just moved into. She was delicate, almost beautiful, big blue eyes, auburn hair and tight ringlets, and a porcelain face so pale it nearly glowed. Her white dress was yellowed with age, with a lace collar and tiny shoes that clicked if you shook her just right. I remember brushing off the dust and smiling, almost amused. An antique doll? I assumed it was harmless, maybe even worth something. As I reached in to lift her out, I felt a small prick. Looking down, I saw a thin silver needle embedded just beneath the doll's dress collar. I winced, sucked the tiny drop of blood from my fingertip, and set the doll back down. I figured the needle had been left by mistake, and thought nothing of it. That first night, I woke to a soft tapping sound, faint yet distinct. My heart raced as I sat up in bed. The house was old, filled with creaks and groans, so I dismissed the noise as settling wood or maybe the wind tapping against an open window. The next day, I went back up to the attic to finish unpacking. The doll was no longer in her box. I found her lying on the floor by the small attic window, her head turned towards the street as if she were watching the world go by. I shook my head, confused but not overly concerned. Perhaps I had left her there the day before and forgotten. That night, the tapping sound returned, but louder this time, a steady, rhythmic beat. I tried to ignore it, sinking further under the blankets and telling myself it was just the house, just old pipes or the wind. But as the nights went on, the tapping grew closer and more persistent, always starting around midnight and continuing until 3 a.m. Every morning, I'd find the doll in a different place, perched on the stairs, resting on a window ledge, or sitting primly at the foot of my bed. One night, I finally dared to check. Part 2, Strange Messages. On the 5th night, the tapping came so close that it sounded like it was right outside my bedroom door. It was just past midnight when I sat up, heart pounding. The house was still and quiet, but I swore I could hear faint whispers woven into the rhythmic tap tap tap. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to see what was causing it. Gathering all my nerve, I crept to the door and flung it open. The hallway was dark, a long stretch of shadows with nothing but the faint ticking of the clock at the end of the hall. I switched on the light, half expecting to find something, but there was only silence. As I turned to go back to bed, I noticed a shape at the far end of the hallway. It was her, the doll, sitting upright against the wall, facing my bedroom door, her blue eyes gleaming in the dim light. My throat went dry. I hadn't brought her downstairs. I forced myself to laugh it off, trying to convince myself I was simply sleepwalking and moving the doll without realizing it. I carried her back up to the attic and shut the door. I even wedged a small chair against it, just to feel more secure. But as I climbed back into bed, I noticed something on the floor near my nightstand, a piece of paper, aged and brittle. I picked it up, hands trembling, and unfolded it carefully. The writing was faded, ink smudged in places, but I could still make out the words, *, keep her in the box. Do not let her out. She is never alone. *. I tried to convince myself that it was just an old note left behind by the previous owner. Maybe it was about something else entirely. But the words gnawed at me. The next day, I tried to forget about it, burying myself in work and avoiding the attic altogether. By evening, I convinced myself I'd been overreacting, that it was all some elaborate trick my mind was playing. But as midnight approached, I couldn't shake a prickling sense of dread. At exactly 12:03 a.m., the tapping resumed, this time directly on my bedroom window. My blood ran cold. I slowly turned, expecting to see a branch swaying in the wind or some animal brushing past. But instead, there she was, standing outside the window, her porcelain face pressed against the glass, eyes wide and staring, her tiny mouth twisted into a frozen, sinister smile. Part 3, The Ritual. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed, eyes glued to the window, watching the doll until the first slivers of dawn light crept across the room. When I finally dared to open the blinds, she was gone. I spent the day in a fog, trying to rationalize what I had seen. There had to be a reasonable explanation. Yet I kept thinking about that note, *. She is never alone, *. I didn't know what it meant, but it haunted me. Finally, as evening drew near, I decided to learn whatever I could about the house. A quick online search yielded nothing but some local legends about strange happenings in the area, odd disappearances, eerie sounds at night. I eventually tracked down the phone number of the previous owner, a man named Mr. Elliott, who'd sold the place for an almost suspiciously low price. I called him, hoping for some kind of explanation. When he picked up, his voice was hesitant, guarded. "Why are you calling me?" he asked after I introduced myself. I just wanted to know if you could tell me anything about the house, about the doll I found in the attic. She seems to move on her own. There was a long pause on the other end. Then he whispered, "You found her?" "Yes, and strange things have been happening ever since." What is she?" He took a sharp breath, his voice dropping even lower. "That doll belonged to my grandmother. She was a collector, but that one, it was different. She'd found it in an estate sale overseas, claimed it called to her, that it wanted to be found. She said it was special." He hesitated, then added, "She kept it locked away after it started acting on its own." I shuddered, glancing over my shoulder at the attic door. "I kept it, thinking I could control it. But it's a curse. That's why I had to sell the place. I couldn't take it anymore. But listen," he said urgently, "there's a way to make her dormant again. My heart raced as he explained the ritual. You need salt, a candle, and a drop of your blood. You have to sit with her and speak to her as if she's alive. Acknowledge her, but don't look into her eyes. She feeds on attention, on fear. I wasn't thrilled at the idea of sitting alone with her, but desperation trumped my fear. I thanked him, hung up, and set about gathering the items for the ritual, my hands shaking as I lit the candle and laid down a circle of salt in the attic. I placed the doll carefully in the center and cut my finger, letting a single drop of blood fall onto her porcelain skin. You can rest now, I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. I know you're here, and I release you. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a thin crack formed across her face, spreading from her hairline down to her mouth. I froze, watching as her eyes slowly rolled back, settling into a closed position. I let out a shaky breath, praying the ritual had worked. But as I turned to leave, I heard a soft voice behind me, low and sweet as a child's whisper. Don't go. Part 4. Her true face. My breath caught in my throat. I turned slowly, heart thundering as I scanned the dim attic. The doll was exactly where I'd left her in the salt circle, eyes shut, expression serene. But I could have sworn I'd heard her whisper. I took a step toward the door, determined to get out of the attic and lock it behind me. But then the candle flickered, casting strange, jagged shadows across the doll's face, accentuating the thin crack that ran down her cheek. It almost looked like a smile. Please stay, came the whisper again, but this time it sounded different, layered, as if there were more than one voice speaking. Goosebumps prickled along my arms. She was awake. I'd done something wrong. Just as I reached the attic door, the candle snuffed out, plunging the room into darkness. The salt circle, once pristine, was now scattered, as if something had disturbed it. I fumbled for my phone, using its dim glow to light my way down the narrow staircase. As I turned to close the attic door, my phone's light caught something on the floor: footprints. Tiny, child-sized footprints, trailing from the salt circle to the staircase. I slammed the door shut, wedged a chair against it, and stumbled back to my room, locking myself in. My mind raced, replaying every moment I'd spent with the doll, trying to understand where I'd gone wrong. And then it hit me. I'd looked into her eyes. I hadn't meant to. It was only a brief glance, but it must have been enough. I felt a chill, realizing that by acknowledging her with that fleeting glance, I'd somehow set her free. That night, I didn't dare sleep. I sat on my bed, clutching a flashlight and straining to hear any sound in the house. The hours dragged by, each one bringing more silence, more tension. But at exactly 3:03 a.m., the tapping began. This time, it was different, no longer a faint, rhythmic sound from the hallway, but sharp, deliberate taps coming from inside my room. I swung the flashlight toward the sound, only to find the doll standing in the corner. Her cracked face angled toward me, lips curling into a mockery of a smile. Her head tilted, and with a low, almost mocking whisper, she said, "I've been waiting so long for someone like you." Part 5. The final bargain. I sat frozen, every muscle locked in terror as her words settled over me. She stood in the corner, staring with those hollow, cracked eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the dark. I wanted to scream, to throw her out, to burn her, but something deeper kept me silent, and instinct that whatever I did next had to be very, very careful. Why me? I managed to whisper, voice barely audible. Her head tilted again, slow and deliberate, like she was savoring every movement. "They all leave me," she whispered back, her voice like the sound of rustling leaves. "But you stayed. You looked. You listened. And now," she stepped closer, her porcelain feet clicking on the floor, "you belong to me." I backed away until I hit the edge of my bed, heart racing. I had to stay calm, to remember Mr. Elliott's words. She feeds on attention, on fear. Summoning every ounce of control, I straightened, trying to keep my breathing steady. "You don't control me," I said, forcing myself to look away from her eyes. "I can put you back in the attic, keep you locked away forever." But she only laughed, the sound delicate yet sharp as broken glass. "Lock me away," she mocked, taking another step forward. "You don't understand. You gave me life. You set me free. And now you're mine." Her cracked face seemed to contort, as if something darker lurked just beneath the porcelain, a glimpse of shadowy features, writhing under the surface. Desperate, I remembered the ritual instructions. Asterisk salt, blood, and a release, asterisk. I needed to end this, somehow sever the connection between us. As she inched closer, her grin widening, I grabbed the small salt jar I'd brought up from the kitchen earlier, flinging its contents onto the floor around her. The salt glowed faintly as it hit the floor, forming a protective circle between us. She stopped, her expression twisting in fury. "No," she shrieked, her voice no longer a child's, but something older, deeper. She lunged toward the edge of the circle, but the salt seemed to hold her back, trapping her within its boundary. I took a shaky breath, trying to recall the words Mr. Elliot had said. "I release you," I whispered, my voice trembling. "You can go back to where you came from." Her face contorted, the shadow beneath the porcelain rising up, seeping out through the cracks in her face. "You can't send me back," she hissed. "You invited me." I froze, feeling a terrible realization dawn. I hadn't released her, I'd invited her. By looking into her eyes, by giving her the drop of blood, I'd made a connection between us that she could exploit. And now, she was using it. The salt circle began to dim as her shadowy form pressed against it, cracks spreading across her porcelain skin. My mind raced, trying to remember anything that could reverse the ritual, to sever the bond between us. And then it hit me, if I'd invited her with blood, I could release her with the same. Before I could second-guess myself, I grabbed a sharp piece of the broken salt jar and cut across my palm, letting my blood drip onto the floor inside the salt circle. "Take this," I said, forcing the words through gritted teeth. "Take it back. I release you." The room seemed to darken as her eyes locked onto the drops of blood. She let out a guttural scream, her porcelain shell cracking further until it shattered, revealing nothing but a dark, empty void beneath. The shadows writhed, gathering around her until her form collapsed inward, shrinking down until she was nothing but a faint shadow against the floor. And then, she was gone. I stayed motionless, staring at the empty circle of salt. The air was cold, stale, and the house had fallen into an unnatural silence. After a long moment, I staggered to my feet, my body heavy with exhaustion and dread. The doll was gone, her presence dissolved into nothing. I swept up the salt, locked the attic, and moved out of the house the very next day. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear the faintest hint of tapping, like porcelain feet clicking just outside my window. And I know, deep down, that whatever I invited in isn't truly gone. She's just waiting for the next invitation.